We have a hard stop at quarter past the hour to make room for the premiere. I'm David Schlesinger. I'm the editor-in-chief of Reuters News. Between 1997 and 2001, the U.S. accounted for about 35% of scientific papers, Europe 38%, and Asia-Pacific just about 20%. Between 2002 and 2006, the U.S. share decreased slightly, Europe increased marginally, Asia-Pacific increased by nearly 40%. Asia-Pacific research output now represents over a quarter of global research and is growing faster than any other region. Patent applications, which you can use as one proxy of the globalization of science and technology. In China, according to the Thomson Reuters Scientific 2008 Patent Focus Report, in 2007, China's Patent Property Office received its 4 millionth patent applications since the first patent law was implemented in 1985. It took 15 years to get the first million, but only 1.5 years to get to the 4th million. Based on the volumes over the past 5 years, inventions from China have been growing at a faster rate than any other region, and that growth looks set to continue into the future. China is expected to surpass the U.S. and Japan by 2014. One result of this globalization of inventions means that anything you buy is a complex melange of inventions from around the world. No more can you look to just a Silicon Valley or one place for innovation. If you just think about PlayStation 3, in the graphic processing unit of PlayStation 3, there are 228 patents involved just in that graphic processing unit from the US, Japan, Europe, and around the world. A very, very complex mix of products and components going across disciplines, companies, geographies, and of course, manufacturing is done all over the world as well. We're here with a very distinguished panel of people to talk about some of the implications of the globalization of science and technology. I welcome them all. And let's start with Mitchell Baker, chairman of the board of Mozilla Corporation, to take the non-intellectual property side of the innovation debate. Would you like to start us, please?
At Mozilla, we make software, and so that puts us in the globalization of technology range more than the globalization of basic scientific research. Our research is all very practical and very short-term related to what we're doing, like in the year range. Primarily on security is our main focus. But on the globalization of technology, we're an example of what happens when collaboration and working together is more important than the protection of intellectual property. So for us, our brand matters. We explicitly disclaim any exclusivity based on copyright law. Everyone has the absolute right to take our work product and do what you want with it. And we have a careful collaborative setting over patent rights. So our basic framework is really quite different. Our globalization of technology is aimed at getting many local centers around the globe of people working based on the core of what we're trying to do, but developing local innovative solutions that fit their market needs. And because the protection of intellectual property is not high in our concerns, we're able to turn those sets of people loose and say, here's the basic framework. You could think of Firefox, for example, as the basic framework for internet access. Figure out what your issue is and how you want to solve it. And because of how we're organized, we're very happy for those people to also make money. Our goal is to be at the center of an ecosystem, and we derive our value from the overall growth in that ecosystem more than from any particular intellectual property asset. And so what we've found in our globalization efforts is that in new areas, there are often a small set of people who will get started. We've seen this in Japan. We're starting to see it in China. It's been very clear in New Zealand. And they will get started in an area that is of particular interest to them. So for many years, the efforts in our project coming from China have been on fonts and on bidirectional text reading. Makes perfect sense. And then from there is to develop the structures so that the people who are interested and have solved some particular problems get involved in the core development, which is then fed back into our main development, rolled into the main project, and then those local centers who start out by solving problems of particular interest to their business or social or family needs become a part of the overall development. And so in our experience, globalization masks many small local centers as starting points, which then eventually become integrated into a development whole. So currently our development organization is quite global, and that's how we have found and created and encouraged teams of people from different areas to get involved. And then, of course, they provide leadership over time.
Thanks very much. Padmasree Warrior is the CTO of Cisco, the networking company, which enables a lot of this collaboration. Would you like to talk about that experience?
Sure. At Cisco, when we look at innovation, intellectual property protection and patents is just a small aspect of how we look at innovation. We actually believe innovation, we are about to enter the next wave in innovation, moving away from closed innovation, and what the internet enabled us to do is to have open innovation. And the next era, we're going to enter what we call global innovation. We firmly believe in that, and we are very committed to, as a company, not only provide the technology that allows people to collaborate on a global basis, but also for ourselves tap into that idea pool that exists all over the world. Some of the examples of technologies that beyond internet we believe will enable the rapid acceleration of innovation are things like wikis and blogs that are used today in the consumer world, but bringing that into the business world, and how we can encourage companies to work together and collaborate, as well as teams within the companies to work together. We also have a technology called telepresence, which is essentially an immersive way of having a video communication. Has a broad array of applications, obviously for business-to-business collaborative applications, but we're actually using that for education and healthcare in rural areas as well. And the third thing that we strongly believe, in the globalization of innovation, we believe education is a very important part of that. And Cisco as a company is extremely committed to that. We have an initiative through Cisco Networking Academies, which was started in 1997. And today we have educational institutions that we call networking academies in over 165 countries. And we've graduated over 2 million students out of these networking academies, with about 500,000 students currently that are enrolled in this. And not only that, we actually emphasize a lot in these academies to have women being educated, because as someone said, educate a man, you educate an individual; educate a woman, you educate a whole family. So 30% of the students coming out of our networking academies are women, and 20% of our instructors are women. And so we strongly believe that in addition to foreign direct investment, what propels global innovation is really making sure we educate the people in the country so that in turn they can become entrepreneurs. So that is the approach we have for innovation on a global basis.
Thanks, very interesting. Benoit Potier is Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Air Liquide. Would you like to talk about the commercialization of this globalized scientific world?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm happy to see that there are still people in the room thinking about long-term issues. We've been hearing about financial crisis and economic consequences of this crisis. I'm happy to see that still people thinking long-term. So, start with just in a few seconds. Air Liquide is a 12 billion euro company, 106 years, born in a garage in France, on one application, which was distillation of air to produce oxygen. After more than 100 years, we are the world leader, and we think that innovation is the only way to sustain performance over the long term. So this is why it's so important to us. We have products all around the planet. Oxygen was the first one, then hydrogen is becoming more and more an issue, and we are even creating new products. As an example, anesthetic gases are more and more used for anesthesia in the medical sector, so we are also the ability to create new products. We've been definitely using globalization as a sort of enabler to be closer to our markets. We started with just one research center, I think it was in France. 20 years ago, we had only 3 research centers. The world was more US, Europe, Japan, so we had 3 research centers. Most of the researchers were French. 20 years later, we have 8 research centers, more than 30 nationalities represented in research. So I think globalization has really helped us to spread the innovation around the world and vice versa, get the input from customers and people from around the world. Now, IT and communication has been key in that, but I think they are only enablers. They are not strategic tools for us. Why? Because beyond the global phenomena of globalization, I think we still need to be very close to markets. And I'm preaching for a research which is becoming more and more linked to the markets, linked to partnerships. I think the research has changed over time. We cannot be isolated. So this is why we have to be in countries working with partners in each and every country we operate. We are highly sensitive, more and more, and probably we can have a debate about open research, but highly sensitive to intellectual property protection. This is really becoming one of the key issues that we have to manage. And as the flow of information can go from one country to the other, we have to protect it, and it has become really the strategic issue for the future. And finally, I would say that because of that, we are at a stage where we would like to open up a new R&D center somewhere in Asia. We have one in Japan already, but the choice of the country will be very dependent upon our ability to really manage the sensitiveness of our IP. And so I would just claim that cost is not the only issue we have to solve. I don't believe that you pick up a country just for cost reasons. So bringing your R&D to a low-cost country doesn't mean anything to me. Anyway, you invest for 20 or 30 years, and before 10 years, the cost will be more or less equivalent in the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Kiyoshi Kurokawa, you're a science advisor to the Prime Minister of Japan. What is the role of government in this?
I think that's a very important question, or interesting question, because over the last 10 plus few years, all of a sudden we are talking about rather international. Nobody talks about international. More often we hear global. And also we begin to hear human resource development was very important. But we tend to say human capital. And why is that? And all of a sudden innovation become a buzzword over the last 10 years or so. Why is that? Because one is global market after the Cold War, end of Cold War, and second is connectivity, started developing World Wide Web, which was introduced in 1992. And as more become participatory, enabled, and empowered, all of a sudden in the global marketplace, nationality become less and less relevant because corporate moves around, and national investment, where is the ownership? So like individual can make a big change, for example, like Google and Apple. So one impact of one idea, one person can spread out and capture the niches and completely different business model. So if his patent is important, who organizes it? He owns that. That obviously an individual or somebody owns it, who manages that, and eventually corporates have to deliver to the marketplace, and corporates become global. So where the corporate ownership is? So I think the national identity is very important, but somehow the role of the country may become quite different. Because quite often corporate sector, university become quite open, so the future leaders come through certain sort of very university who gives you a value to the future of somebody who may be out of norm, so that peer review system, even peer review system become under sort of scrutiny, because now Gates Foundation in Europe and also Royal Society UK, they have a sort of adventurous out-of-box research proposal, 2 pages, something like that, for 5-10 years, because peer review by definition is not compatible with innovation. So that is a new trend. So I think we are really looking for somebody and some group of people who could deliver some new value to address the global issues like climate change, environment, water. That's a risk is a great opportunity for any business and any entrepreneurs. Silicon Valley last year invested like $4 billion for clean energy and venture capital. Year earlier, they invested only $1 billion. So that means 4 times more. So that's a great opportunity. And to do that, I think that old paradigm, somehow we are looking for some new paradigm, which perhaps may not be consistent with the old paradigm or old values.
All right, we can get to talking about the new paradigms in a moment. But first, Neil Gershenfeld, the director of the Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT, do you want to bring us home with some of the specifics around global innovation?
Sure, and if I could have the slides now. The new paradigm is a great lead into what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the technology to create technology and how that's going to amplify what we're discussing. And again, if we could have the slides, what I want to do is I want to show you a few pictures and videos of coming technologies to give a glimpse at where this is headed. We're just at the edge of a new digital revolution. Digitization is very important for this meeting. Telephones were digitized. Phone calls used to get worse with distance. Now we have the internet. Computers were digitized. On the left is the last great analog computer. It was made at MIT, and the longer you ran it, the worse the answer was. It got worse over time. Now computers are digital, but manufacturing is analog. The frontiers of making chips or airplanes is you spread stuff around and bake it. It's a very old process. Your body is made by molecular computers that run programs, and that's what makes it possible to make you. So research in the lab is creating things like this. These are microscopic computers where each bit is a bit of data, but it's also a bit of material. So the output of a program isn't just numbers. It can be something you print or a chemical reaction or something you fabricate. So the computer doesn't control a tool. It is a tool. The program doesn't describe a thing. It is a thing. And what this does is it brings the digital world to the physical world, and just like the internet versus an analog telephone or a Pentium versus an analog computer, what this is going to bring is complexity. We can make much more complex stuff, but even more importantly, personalization. Because it means now anybody will ultimately be able to make anything anywhere by digitizing fabrication, by bringing the world inside computers, outside computers. Now, to do the work I'm showing you at places like MIT, we spend tens of millions of dollars on machines that look like this. These are the mainframes of digital fabrication that let us assemble everything from atoms up to buildings. And the research roadmap on the last slide, in 20 years, will lead us to what looks like the Star Trek replicator, the thing that can make anything, including itself. And it's an exercise in embodying computation in materials. But the reason I wanted to show you these pictures is to tell you this future has happened today. Mainframes reached PCs through mini-computers that brought computing from organizations to work groups, and that's when everything you do today on a computer was invented. Email, word processing, and all of that. From my lab, we just started a little spin-off project, which is to set up these field fabrication labs that are tens of thousands, not tens of millions of dollars, and they're kind of like the mini-computers. They're a little bit less powerful than the mainframes. They're not yet the PC, but they kind of let you do all of this today. And we opened just one in inner-city Boston. Then the Ghanaians in Boston said there had to be one in Ghana. Then the South Africans saw the one in Ghana and said they had to have one. And then rural India, above the Arctic Circle, and yesterday I was in Beijing where one's coming. And they're opening all over the world. We didn't think the world needed this, but the pull was a digital divide, but not a divide in communication and computation, but a divide in instrumentation and fabrication, measuring and modifying the world, not just getting information on a screen. Here's some examples of projects. So from the bottom to the top, it starts with when people get access to these tools in these informal labs and little community centers, it starts with technical empowerment. In the lower left is a young girl who did high-tech rapid prototyping on a street corner and made a few $100s, but more than that had this life-changing joy of I can sort of control the world. On the lower right, you see a young girl in Ghana who had just fabricated a circuit board. She's doing what's called surface mount rework. She's about to load microcode for embedded sensor. This is an 8-year-old girl in a Ghanaian coastal village. How many of you can do that? So what's interesting is she's not catching up to you, she's skipping over to you. She's skipping over the stage where advanced technology is centralized, and now a young girl can do it in a Ghanaian coastal village. Then these little labs that weren't meant to be useful started tackling useful problems like instrumentation for agriculture, turbines for energy conversion. The project above is using the technology in these field labs. I'm holding a device that you can make for about $10 that's an internet terminal, and then this connects to this device from Cisco that's about $50 that's a server for a whole network of these. So instead of trying to mass produce a $100 computer and then parachute it from above and save the world's problems, you can produce computing locally so that the skills and jobs are local, and they don't have to be all the same. You can have big ones and small ones and different ones. So instead of energy or healthcare or computation being top-down mega projects, they can come from the bottom up. Back to the slides, please. Then people started doing things like rapid prototyping of houses, making custom houses like kids' playhouses but full size. And then eventually businesses and jobs started coming from these. And then research. In the upper right, you see a 3D construction kit that was invented by young children but became the subject of PhD research at MIT for scaling microstructures. So what this is leading to, and perhaps this is a good lead into the discussion, is if it's essentially already possible today for ordinary people in small communities to create advanced technology, look at MIT. I went for the infrastructure, but we can get access to much of that in the field. I went for the people, but with broadband video, thanks to people like Cisco, I see collaborators in Africa or Norway more than my colleagues at MIT because we're too busy to talk. I went for the libraries, they're all online. So there's still things you need MIT for, but a lot of what you used to go to MIT for, you can do out in the field. And so to keep up, this breaks the boundaries between research, education, aid, industry. It's kind of right at their intersection. And so this network has had to invent new institutions. A nonprofit foundation to help support invention as aid, and it's running the next global meeting of this network in India next January. A for-profit fund crossing venture capitalism, risk-based technical investing with microfinance, and a Fab Academy, a degree program to do distributed education. If anybody can make anything anywhere, we need to really revisit the institutions that live at this intersection of education, aid, industry, research.
Fascinating. So how does the panel feel about that distributed model? Where is the role for the corporation then? Where will innovation happen? Any other views around that?
Sure. We're actually a strong partner with MIT. Okay. He showed a Cisco device there. So our engineers are working to make that happen. Like I said, I think as a company, we believe that more ideas that get generated across the world, the better off we will be because we can then tap into that innovation. So we often fund these projects, we educate the people. Our strategy for innovation is what we call build, buy, and partner. We recognize that it's no longer possible in the world that we live in today for a company to believe that all great ideas will come from within the company. So we strongly believe in buying technology wherever we have to, as well as partnering with the universities as well as local institutions to create ideas. So we're proud to say the box that he showed is actually a Cisco Linksys box that he's using as a server.
Where will Mozilla be in 20 years in this kind of world?
Well, actually, I think this is a really good example that the question here is business models.
Yeah.
Right? And how do you create active business models around this type of thing? Because the technology is there. And one thing I think the Internet has made clear to us is that if what you're interested in is maximum social and societal gain, then collaboration and enabling more people gets you further faster. The Internet is open, look what's happened. Right? You don't need partnerships, you don't need agreements with other people. Maximum social gain, yes. But the issue is that we don't have a mechanism to take that and combine it with private economic gain. And so I think the question is not, is this good for technology or good for innovation or maybe good for solving problems or good particularly for solving local problems in villages. Unquestionably, it's a giant positive. The real issue is it possible and how do we find a model to combine that with the kind of economic value generation that creates the capital and creates the kinds of businesses that we have here? That, I think, is the unanswered question.
Could I comment on the business model?
Sure.
If you can make an internet terminal for $10 or a 3D construction kit from a cardboard box, those seems like great businesses. We had a lot of trouble trying to work with conventional businesses, though, because this just doesn't fit what they do. And what we found is it's a little bit like inkjet printing and its impact on HP. Instead of doing high volume printing in one place, you do beautiful printing, but a lot of it at a slow rate. So in the same sense, if you can do this, the reason we've had to run up these kind of new funds is you can design something in one place, but instead of then producing it centrally, you can go global by doing low-rate production locally.
Right.
And so what it means is you have to make a network, not a factory.
Right.
So when you have the discussion around the Air Liquide board table, do you see this as a threat, or do you see this as something that you can then work with?
No, I think it is an inspiring model. It's very interesting. I don't think it applies to all sort of innovation. We tend to separate innovation towards more low-cost efforts, because I think there's a lot of innovation to be brought in lowering the cost of products, generally speaking, and I think what you show is a very good example. But there's another part of innovation which is really, pure innovation, things that derive from, unfortunately, long programs and heavy money, and I don't think that you can, spread the innovation around the world. I mean, in our business, I don't see how someone in a village in Africa could invent another process for separating oxygen from air. Might happen. If it happens, tell me, because I'm interested. But seriously, I mean, I think there are some subjects where you can really put this type of model in place, and others that really require the old-style research.
So what's the Japan answer? How does Japan stay at the forefront of innovation in a world where it could happen anywhere with anyone?
Well, Japan has been very successful from 1960 through 1990, so that all the social structure has been built upon the sort of old paradigm, which is very resistant to anything new. So that I'm really fighting for, because they have such a great competence in core competence, but somehow reaching out into the global partnership seems to me weak. So that I'm really promoting this new paradigm is, as you said, is globalized, more personal, individuality and connectivity and local values. This Ghana girl, I mean, she sees that from her own perspective in this locally relevant issue. That throw in a completely new value, so that collaboration and personalization would create a new value, and also the world become one, so like one inclusive society. But we should recognize this one inclusive society is not going to be a melting pot. It's going to be a salad bowl. So everybody has to be different, and that different salad bowl give you a best salad plate, right? So that we have to recognize heterogeneity and diversity, and that is the essence of new value. No question about that.
Let's go to the salad bowl of the audience. And if there are comments or questions for our panel here about this issue of how technology gets globalized and how innovation gets spread around the world. Yes, the woman in the back. Please introduce yourself and ask a question.
I am a reporter from Tianjin magazine in Beijing. I have two questions for the panelists. The first question is, so right now some Chinese technology company trying to go abroad and buy companies such as companies in the US or in Europe. Often they found that they're not so welcomed by the foreign countries. Do you think, in the globalization perspective, that this created a barrier for Chinese companies to make it bigger and stronger? The second question is also about China. So China is making a lot of efforts in transforming from a manufacturing country to focusing more on high tech and to bring more innovation. And do you have any advice to the policymakers and also the entrepreneurs and how to handle this transformation smartly and well? Because I think this is really important for the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Who'd like to take the question about barriers and whether the nationalistic barriers actually will get in the way of globalization for a country like China? Any thoughts on that? Or are we saying that in fact those barriers are coming down and that in the decades to come that won't be as important?
So I can take it. I think we can look at it from two perspectives. There's one perspective of intellectual property protection. I think there'll be certain areas where intellectual property that's created, which many countries will consider to be very close to, close to heart. Innovations you can think of in the area of energy or anything that has to do with homeland security, protecting the national security. There'll always be those areas that there will be some regulation and some restrictions. But in a broader sense, if you look at commercial innovation, I think the barriers are coming down. I think the old model used to be we had a couple of centers of economic power and capital flowed from those centers to other centers. Actually, there was a discussion in one of the earlier panels about the world truly becoming a multipolar world where capital is going to start to flow from many different directions. I think as that starts to happen, some of the barriers will come down. They won't go away. I don't think they'll ever go away because there'll always be technologies that companies and governments will invest for a number of years, fundamental breakthroughs that they will feel they will have to be protected as an intellectual property rights.
Other thoughts on that? I mean, your model seems is completely against the whole idea of barriers.
I actually think the two questions are related.
Yes.
The one question about barriers Chinese companies might face when they try to expand internationally, and the second question about policymakers in China. I think the answer is that most countries have barriers of one type or another. It's not just China going to the United States. And certainly coming into China, there's a wealth of regulation if you want to invest here that you need to comply with as well. So to me, the answer is that all regulators, both in the United States and in China and in other places in the world, should look very carefully. You want the minimum regulation necessary. National security, maybe. It's a little like global trade, right? That the tendency is always to put up trade barriers to protect yourself. So you have barriers to protect your business and your industry and your investment. And in some cases, if you look at those carefully, they'd be very needed. But any regulation or any barrier about who can invest that doesn't matter or that's bureaucratic or historical in nature will slow down innovation and will slow down your global nature. And so look very carefully at them. In some cases, you want to slow your global nature down because your national security demands it, or you want to protect an industry and you're clear about it. But if that's not the case, then very often these regulations are of historical interest, but no longer the most effective way to generate the most possible value.
Thanks, Benoit first, and then Neil.
Right, yes. Maybe just one comment. I think when there's some form of protection, it's always because as companies, for instance, we think that the investment we've done is somehow not valued. And I think the protection results from this feeling of having lost time and efforts in investment. And I think respecting investment is key. If anyone respects the investment that anyone has done in something, I think there's no protection. It's just a level playing field. Everyone is equal. That's one. And because of that, I think IP, again, is something which is quite important. Everyone reacts today with this sort of background in the mind. I mean, when IP is at stake, people tend to block and refrain from going ahead. So I think there's essentially rules of the game that anyone would like to see respected, and if it is the case, there's no barrier. Should not be any barrier, because we know the positive effect of globalization on many, many subjects. So I think that may explain some sort of protectionism from time to time.
Yeah, I wanted to comment on the policy implication. In the world today, there's perhaps a few hundred elite research institutions that can handle maybe a few thousand people each. And I don't think the ratio of a few 100,000 to 6 billion is a correct measure of the number of inventive people on Earth. The elite institutions can handle a tiny fraction. What we found around the world is, almost by definition, the most inventive people don't fit in their local society. They're kind of outcast outliers. Yet a lot of the national attempts at innovation build expensive temples that exactly keep out those people with the structure. And so what I would suggest is investing in the bottom, not the top. Investing in expanding access for inventive people to do what they believe in, not building expensive temples. It's really the last battle to try to recreate Silicon Valley. There's this opportunity with the new technology to really fight this new battle in a much more distributed way to harness the planet's brains.
Thanks, Mr. Kurokawa.
I don't see, because I have many friends in China and also Chinese, but I think they are very much entrepreneurial, and I like them. But as a corporate or as a business, I think the essence of this globalized world is the transparency for any government or institution or corporate or university, sort of transparency and democratic sort of process of whatever decision making will be done. And that's then everybody would work anywhere which suited to your own objectives. Yeah.
Thank you. The gentleman in the third row.
Adamu Tambara from Zimbabwe. The globalization of science and technology provides an opportunity for poor communities and poor countries to move up the value chain. In other words, some of the cool things from MIT are more applicable in poor countries than in rich countries. Wireless power, wireless telecoms, and all these goodies. And there's an opportunity for poor countries to leapfrog and use cleaner technologies, green technologies, and so on and so forth. However, there is very little appetite by the West, by China, to invest in manufacturing in Africa, to invest in these new technologies in Africa. They want to do mining, they want to do agriculture, they want Africa to remain a commodity-based economic setup. But we would rather have the staff from MIT and be able to leapfrog and use newer technologies. What can we do to revise the global business models so that there's investment in poor economies around science and technology as an equalizer of our societies?
Is that the kind of conversation that you have within government?
Yes, I think, in fact, I think one is for corporate sector, like so, because of global market, there are many, many new billionaires, a number of billionaires increase, but I think ask them to think about what about bottom billion, and that is the thing, and that is the reason Bill Gates really created this creative capitalism and going for global health, and just NGO and linking NGOs and also like United Nations and this so top down to bottom up to sort of philanthropic approach, which is very good. So I think that's one issue. And also many governments try to help through MDGs and United Nations last few days. I think that's in New York City. And I think there's a lot of investment and also new policies. And for Japan, let's say, this May we hosted the TICAD, African Development, and 40 head of states joined together. And I think next week we invited about 24 science ministers to Japan just to develop some of the collaboration through university and some Japanese funded program to sort of collaboration and brain circulation through, I'm also proposing this brain circulation to G8 science advisor to implement, be it university or research institute or some any nationally funded program, so that Africa and also South Asia and other places, faculty and students will be sort of bilateral and sort of connected and stay connected. That will be a key. That may take a time, but I think then corporate sector would follow.
Well, what is the responsibility of the corporate sector?
So I think I was just going to comment, at Cisco we have an approach, we call this country transformations. When we look at where there are business opportunities for our corporation, we don't just go there to do business. We actually strongly believe in public-private partnerships, and in many cases at a corporate level we have public-private partnership boards. We have one for China, we have one for many of the other developing countries as well, and we call it country transformation, where we like to work with local countries, local agencies, both NGO as well as government-sponsored agencies, to invest in education, invest in healthcare, using Cisco technology, providing Cisco technology sometimes, as well as investing in entrepreneurship in that country, because ultimately innovation, by the way, I think my own belief is it doesn't happen just with manufacturing. There's other ways that innovation can drive and help economies in the countries, and I think that's the point. As innovation becomes more global, we can think beyond manufacturing, and what we believe in is actually we start venture groups where we invest venture capital, Cisco venture capital money within startups in many of these countries. So I think we have an approach that's much broader. We look at it as a country transformation rather than just a FDI effort.
Yes. When you stand up, they'll come running to you. We have a microphone, please.
quite honest, I'm Jim Sheriff from Cisco, and quite honestly, one of the things that hurts my head is the new innovation cycle around mass innovation, and that seems to cut at the core of intellectual property rights. And so you have this vicious circle. You can't protect your individual intellectual property rights, and so you don't want to fund it. And if you can't fund it, then you can't get the cycle started. How do you see this cycle getting positive going forward, where there's still investment to create intellectual property, but takes advantage of this new paradigm of mass collaboration?
It's a great question. Neil, would you like to start with that?
So projecting just a little bit down this roadmap of everybody making everything, the bad news is intellectual property is no longer protectable. Sorry. Meaning, if an 8-year-old girl in Ghana can do what I'm showing you today, it means you just can't protect it. There's too many places for it to leak to control it. You don't have one big entity. You can't sue the planet for infringement. But the good news is, and Mozilla is a wonderful case study, that intellectual property can exist but not be based on controlling a scarce resource. You can identify authorship and you can seek compensation, but it comes from how you add value, from how you use technology to solve problems, not by controlling a scarce resource that you gain access to. And so there are already a number of examples where the whole IP model shifts from viewing it as a scarce resource to transparency and access, and what you don't protect, your position comes from how you add value.
So two things. Yes, Mozilla lives in a world where intellectual property isn't our focus. We actually don't claim that that's the world for everyone. Maybe, but it's certainly in long-term, multi-year investment of things that can be easily copied, just as you described, that maybe the world where intellectual property protection is really quite important for some sets of businesses and research. So our first point is we're not necessarily saying we're a model for everyone. But to try and answer your question, I think right now the next step is for those companies who remain convinced that the core intellectual property assets are fundamental to protecting them, that the key to taking advantage of mass collaboration, learning about it, and maybe even moving, is to divide into certain areas. So find an area that it really is core, what the protections are, and then see if you can define areas around that where the intellectual property is not so critical. And then you have to be willing to give up a fair amount of control in those areas. It has to be real. So if you can't find an area that you feel comfortable with, don't try. That's the worst world, is to give people some set of rights and then pull it back because you think you're damaging your company's value. So in my area, internet software, I use Flickr as an example of this. So Flickr is, it's got mass collaboration, and the value of the system is based on the number of people who contribute and contribute their ideas. We post photos, but we label them, we tag them, many of them are open. So the value of Flickr is in the number of photos and the tags and the way people participate. And in that area, what's the intellectual property of the identification and classification system of the assets? That is not owned or controlled by Flickr. Right now, the actual service that they run is, or Yahoo maintains it now. So that's not an example in the hardware or the pharmaceutical space, but the intellectual property of what the service is and who has it and whatever they say about the data remains with Flickr, but the actual mass collaboration where people are actually working, they control what they do, and they control their photos and what they label them. So if you can find that area, then it's worth trying. And you may find that you can actually move further into that area, and that the set of assets that you need to control is more closely definable.
Benoit, you mentioned this in your opening statement, so you must have a view.
Well, I think there's another element. I fully agree that there's a portion of the research that is more applied and comes from the field, and this one you don't have to control everything. I think it's not the case, but there's a cycle time in research, and we also have to take that into account. When you are at the beginning of a totally new product or research, I mean, this is the time when you have to control what you do and really keep it for yourself. Otherwise, again, that, you're going to lose, and the investment that you've done is wasted. Again, investment is the key. any company doesn't want to really waste investment. Investment in everything, in fixed assets, but also in people, and in research, in ideas, and this is what we try to protect. At the beginning of the cycle, you have to protect it. You have to have a strong IP policy. And in the middle of the cycle, the end of the cycle of a product, I mean, it's obvious that you have to have more cooperative approach, and then IP is probably less important. So I think the model depends also on the timing in the cycle.
And I would add, actually, how you develop. So in our case, we actually have a fair amount of value in the intellectual property. It's not that easy to do what we've created, but it's been created by multiple people. So we don't have the sense of unfairness or someone taking our work because it's a joint, combined work in its creation, which may be quite different for the products you
I actually think it's a business model question. I think in your case, whatever you're inventing and protecting is ultimately the product you're selling. Whereas I think in your case, you have an ecosystem that you're building around. So I think it ultimately comes down to is the product that you're inventing what you're selling. And if that's your differentiating advantage, then you want to protect it. But if you're more interested in getting your product out, everybody wants to use it, and you make money as more and more people use it, then you want to make it open and make it more collaborative. So I think it really comes down to, I don't think there's one size-fits-all answer here. I think in certain industries, certain business models, it's very important to protect intellectual property. In other cases, though, we are going to a world where there are ideas that are going to come from everywhere. And if you're not having an open way of incorporating those, ultimately you lose the advantage that you have.
Can I disagree with an assumption? Or go ahead.
No, there's always somebody who thinks something new. That's a challenge. I think just two examples. Why we use Wikipedia, that's one thing, rather than Britannica. And second is intellectual ventures by Mia Ford and Edward Jones. See what happens. I mean, they're challenging with the new intellectual ventures. That I'm going to see them next week, but that's a new challenge.
You wanted to challenge something?
Yeah, I want to challenge the uniaxial model that basic research becomes applied research, then goes in the field, and then there's users. I used to believe in that, but the more we do technology in the field, I'd say it's in equilibrium, and at least as much knowledge is going backwards. Like, just a very tiny example, the one I was holding, was we were doing research on scaling 3D assembly of nanostructures, conventional basic research that meets all those attributes, and was having a hard time on the scaling. Kids playing with these construction kits in the field labs came up with an algorithm for 3D construction that was much more efficient and scaled better. And so the PhD theses and the patents and all of that were on the work of young children. Now, the kids couldn't have done the basic research, but the basic researchers failed to make a step from the kids. And that's not accident. It happens over and over. So what I'd submit in that world is it's not uniaxial and it's not a boundary. It's how do you compensate networks?
The gentleman in the third row there. When you stand up, they'll find you. Do we have a microphone, please?
Microphone?
Why don't you just yell? Oh, she's coming.
Is this working? Yes.
Yeah.
My name is Don Koenig. I'm chairman of Prudential Corporation Asia, but I'm also an advisor to a research university. And as I'm listening to the panel, and I'm recognizing the big implications for business models, and I hear the last comment that Neil made about the challenge to uniaxial research. I'm wondering if you have, in a sense, value destruction at everybody makes everything, and you have these large research universities that are depending on a model of big funding, big programs, university-centric. What's the future implication for research universities around the world as we think about it? Of course, MIT will survive in any environment, but in general, are we going to see a restructuring? If you look out 10 years, what does a great research university have to do to adapt and survive?
Briefly, who wants to answer that one? Neil, will MIT survive?
So I'd say there's two pieces to answering. MIT will survive, but its role will be more narrow. We're in the middle of inventing new research institutions that, again, are distributed, not central. And to see where this is going to play out, there's great case histories. If you look at the future of either software or music, it was done centrally by big institutions. There was this brief spike with Napster or Linux of yippee, it's free, nobody pays anybody and there's no organization. Where it settled is this whole ecology of markets and organizations of 1, 10, 100, 1,000, a million. And so likewise what's going to happen is research in between garage inventors and MIT, it's going to be much more heterogeneous and much more connected.
We have just a few more minutes. I think we should sum up. So I'd like each of the panelists to briefly think about when we have this conversation in 20 years' time at the Summer Davos, where would we place today's conversation? Are we in the middle of a revolution? Are we at the beginning of a revolution? Where will we be in 20 years? Why don't we just go down the row?
Okay. I think from looking back at history, new technology really sort of boost up some of the new paradigm, which takes about 20 years. And during that time, there's always a bubble burst. So like IT bursted like the year 2000, and that will become a new sort of foundation of a new business model. And that's what's happened. Therefore, IT may mature in 20, 30 years, but there may be new things. And new things, in my personal view, is something on this global issue, that's climate change and environment. That's where new innovation may be coming from. Could be a nanotech, bio, and IT. There are new combinations. I think I'm very much looking forward to that.
So I'm a technologist, so I'm always going to say we're at the beginning of a revolution. I think we are at the beginning of a revolution of going towards more of a global innovation model. I think research institutions will always have a role because there will be new problems that will face us that didn't exist 10 years ago. I think research institutions have a lot of role to play in coming up with alternative energy solutions, solving the world's water problems, and making the world much greener. All these problems didn't exist per se many years ago. I think internet will continue to evolve, or the web will continue to evolve. So 10 years from today, when we're sitting down and having these conversations, we will have a similar conversation that will be the beginning again, but some of these things will mature. So I never think of technology as maturing. I always think of it as reaching a place where it'll create a new revolution.
And will Mozilla be an outlier in 20 years still, or will it be at the center of a whole network like you?
Well, separate from our product, the way that Mozilla does things will be at the center of an entire network. I think rather than at the beginning or the end, things go in cycles or in waves. So the dispersal of new information and the movement of innovative centers has happened throughout human history. It hasn't always been, the United States, like the last 100 years. So I think we're in another cycle of seeing dispersion of innovative capability to different centers. And at the same time, we've been in a pattern where research and development has been increasingly centralized and increasingly based on large amounts of capital and increasingly based on intellectual property protection. And I think we're at a part of the cycle now where we're beginning to see distributed mass collaborative projects and innovation rise in importance. Not to overtake all intellectual property, as I said, but within the cycle. And I think we're at the early phase of this cycle of what actually happens with distributed, coordinated, shared development.
Benoit, Potier?
Well, I knew the panel would be refreshing, so I'm not disappointed. Actually, I heard from Neil that we are entering into a sort of new kids revolution. I'm looking forward to see who are the kids and what they can do. I honestly think that it's probably the beginning of the revolution, not the end. And I think corporations are going to really think about what it means to do research in the future. I still think that there are some aspects of the traditional research that are necessary, but not only I'm aware, but I believe that part of the research will be done very differently. Just one thing I'd like to say, and it relates to the question from Zimbabwe. When you cannot really do research in a country, I mean, you may act differently. We have, for instance, created a foundation, Air Liquide Foundation, and one theme is actually to have micro initiatives coming from the field, supported by one of the 40,000 employees. And this might be sort of innovation, can be research on the field, and that's another way of bringing research to the field. So through different aspects, I think research and technology is going to be developed in the future very differently from the way it was in the past. So it's the beginning of the revolution.
Neil, two pungent sentences.
This panel reflects a clear taxonomy in the meeting of there's corporations, there's NGOs, there's governments, there's universities. The technologies we're discussing are going to put that all in a blender, and those distinctions won't make sense in the same way. The greatest challenge and the greatest question and the greatest opportunity is to invent what are those new organizations that come out of the blender.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.